Hello, everybody, all at once. This is Theo Cedar Jones, and I wanted to make a year-end address to my guitar students in rock and roll, and this applies generally to everybody also. And this is about why I think rock and roll should be the core of public education and all general education. And new evidence has come to light that when they studied the brain activity of people who are playing a musical instrument, they found more activity in the brain in more different places of the brain than any other human activity they could study. Any. So all the other stuff you're doing that's not rock and roll, you're dumbing yourself down. Number one. So if you want your youth to have the highest form of brain activity and stimulation in their education curriculum, there's nothing that we know of that surpasses rock and roll. Now, they study people who played an instrument. Rock and roll takes it further. Rock and roll is rarely a person sitting by themselves playing an instrument, is it? It's playing in a band. It's playing in a group with other people where not only is your brain being stimulated by the activity of playing the musical instrument, it's in addition to that, being stimulated by hearing other people playing their musical instruments and having to coordinate your playing with their playing in real time to create something that gels or something that grooves, something that has a mysterious quality of being whole and satisfying and richer than anything that individual players could achieve, which is a wonderful experience of synergy. Now, when the brain achieves a state of synergy, that's more than just stimulation through playing an instrument. It's being able to also engage an audience, and the audience reaction and the chaotic emotional environment created in a live musical performance. Now, you've just added a third layer, playing the instrument, engaging other musicians simultaneously in real time, and then engaging the audience. Now, if you're an extraordinary artist or band, when you perform live, sometimes you improvise. You flow. You create something that's not scripted. Now, what brain activities are active when you're improvising with a live band before an audience, playing an instrument, and singing at the same time? Now, I give the example of Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead as a specific concrete example. If you took the brain science that we currently have and extrapolated it to what Jerry Garcia must be experiencing when he's performing live, that must be a level of brain activity that surpasses anything that's ever been measured, and maybe anything that even Einstein or Marilyn Monroe experienced mentally. It may be that rock stars and the great rock and rollers have had the greatest brain experience in all of the Westerners, excluding the East, because we know that the Easterners have a tradition of meditation and yoga that enables them to achieve brain states that are extraordinary. And I want to get to that later when we talk about what should public education really be about. What should your youth's education be about? And I have a new 5-part plan, but the first part is rock and roll. Isn't that something? Why should rock and roll be the core curriculum universally for students everywhere? Well, number one, if you believe in the science, wouldn't you want your youth to have the competitive advantage of the most brain functioning, the most brain activity, and brain capabilities? I know I would. I want that for my offspring, my youth. For any youth, I would want them to have the highest brain capacity and functioning that they possibly could have. I certainly wouldn't want them to be dumbed down by anything And it seems to me a lot of public education is about mindless, repetitive, conformity, one-size-fits-all education that dumbs people down a lot. If you don't want to dumb down your youth or yourself, why not get the best? What's the best for the brain? I say it's what they haven't even studied yet. It's not just a person playing an instrument by themselves. It's the unique, multiply layered challenge of playing in a live rock band in front of an audience. And if you want to take it further, being able to improvise while doing all that. So Jerry and the Grateful Dead are the supreme example. Not only did they achieve that high level of brain functioning, but they sustained it for 30 years. They made a lot of money. One of the highest grossing touring acts in rock history. We should get the best for our youth. Now I'm going to explain some other reasons why I think rock and roll, specifically above every other art form and every other form of music that's ever been, is unique in its capacity to create challenge, difficulty, and the highest forms of achievement and the highest forms of experience and learning. Rock and roll is also the best because, unlike jazz and classical and blues and R&B and funk and hip-hop and every other form of music in the world, rock and roll has more of the best songs than any genre. Reason 3, rock and roll is the best. Rock and roll, unlike every other art form, includes all other art forms. Rock and roll has sculpture and dance and image art, projections, painting, electronics, and technology, and storytelling and lyrics and literary influences, all forms of music, all forms of rhythm, all forms of sonic texture and abstract sounds. Anything that you can conceive of, including political activism and social theater and historic change, is all included in rock and roll the way it is not in any other artistic genre or movement you can think of that's ever existed. Rock and roll is a summary art form. It is electronic. It is the best that America can do. Nothing America has done is better. Not the atom bomb. It's amazing and clever, but horrible and bad. Not the mission to the moon. That's very cool, but not as cool as rock and roll. Because most people, when they describe the highest form of social prestige and status and accomplishment and greatness and glory and godlike status that a human can achieve in the West, it's to be a rock star. You're a rock star. You are a rock star. They don't say, you are an astronaut. You're a moonwalker. No, they say, you're a rock star. Don't you want to be a rock star? Well, only if you want to do the most difficult job that I've ever had. But not to go down that alleyway. Rock and roll's the best. Rock and roll's the best we've got. Rock and roll's the best thing America's ever done. Rock and roll includes all the great things America has done. Social justice, equality, racial integration. Oh my God, rock is racial integration. Rock includes the best that we've got, so why not give our youth the best that we've got? Give them the best brain stimulation. Give them the best songs. The best songs that you've ever loved in your life. most of them are rock and roll. They're not jazz, they're not blues, they're not classical. There's 1,000 songs in rock that are so great that they whoop ass over the 10 best songs or 100 best songs in any other genre. Whoop ass! Don't you want the best for your youth? Now, rock was always demonized and suppressed, and this is visible in the fact that your public school, and 99% of the public schools that I know of or heard of, don't have rock and roll at all in their education. They've often cut music and arts programs to one degree or another altogether, let alone the fact that there's no rock and roll. There's jazz and there's classical. When rock rose, the jazz musicians went down, the classical musicians went down, the blues musicians never even had a chance. They got a raise from rock, but the jazz and the classical musicians went down, and they formed unions. They got part of the union scene, and the unions were in control of the public schools. Therefore, the unions shut out rock and roll and kept a secret hiding place for jazz and classical in the public school system. That's wrong. That is wrong. That's dumbing down your kids. Not to say the classical is dumb, but it doesn't include hard-edged polyrhythms the way rock does. It doesn't include constant lyrical message. There's a lot of things that classical doesn't have. More timbre and more textural opportunities. More hip-thrusting, wild, crazy ecstasy. There's a lot of things that classical doesn't have that only rock has. So, why not give the best to your youth? Rock has the best brain stimulation. It has the best songs, and therefore it is the most civilizationally supportive. Our civilization is constantly threatened, just like Rome. You think you got a good civilization going, and then what happens? Accidents of history happen, or the ego happens, and then we're going to get to why ego transcendence is part of this educational plan. But if you want to support your civilization, support rock and roll. Rock and roll is the best aesthetics, the best message. Consider this. If you look at the 100 best movies ever made, and you compare that to the 1,000 best songs ever made, you see that movies are generally darker. Rock is generally lighter in messaging. The messaging is violenter, darker, eviler in its everything in movies. Altogether, just take any of the top 100 lists of movies and feel your feelings when you consider what each of those movies is about. You'll be hard-pressed to find stuff that's as much about love, as much about togetherness, as much about getting along, as much about light, as much about beauty, as much about sex and freedom and fun as rock and roll. So movies are a subclass of art compared to rock and roll. So if you want to give your best to your youth, give them rock and roll and a solid core curriculum of rock throughout their lives. Think of it, the amount of art history that goes into learning about rock, the social history that goes into learning about rock, the mathematics, the electronics, the physics, the technology, the computers that go into rock, the social networking, the web technologies, the marketing, the posters and the artwork and the design and the staging and the lights and the therapeutic combination of elements that creates sacred space at a live rock show that allows ecstasy for masses of people at once. Movies don't do that. And sports only do it for 50% of the people that go, because your other half loses every time. Not so at rock. At a rock concert, everyone goes away happy, humming, and maybe getting laid. So sports is a second class to rock and roll. So why not give your best to the youth, your youth? You cannot teach anything better to youth than rock and roll, except for cooperation, meditation, ego transcendence, non-duality, and sustainability. And those are the other 4 things that are going to go into my proposed new core curriculum for education. But today, I just want to cover the rock side and wrap this up. This is for the guitar students and the people who are spending the big bucks to educate your youth so that they have increased survivability in a competitive marketplace, but that so they have some wisdom about what is beyond the rat race of stress and fear and frustration and limitation and death. If we don't teach the ultimate wisdom of ego transcendence, then you're doing the ultimate dumbing down of your youth, because what dumbs down people more, what suppresses brain functioning more, what suppresses the heart more than the ego self-contraction? Nothing. So, in other video blogs, I'm going to get into the aspects of core curriculum in your education that will include ego transcendence and non-duality. But for now, let's wrap up the rock and roll side of things. I hope I brought you steps closer to realizing that rock and roll is not trivial, it's not frivolous, it's not entertainment only, it is not a product only. It is our civilization at its best. Equality, integration, ecstasy, cooperation. What has proved cooperation better than the Beatles? The Beatles were the first true rock band. Rock bands are a technology that didn't exist before 1960. Because electric guitars and this idea that cooperation could sprout anywhere, that rock bands could flourish in garages across the country. The idea of a garage band is the idea that cooperation is universal, that anyone, anywhere could just get together and cooperate magically and miraculously to do the impossible, to travel for art and make money at art in rock and roll in America? Who thought that was any kind of idea that would succeed? And yet, you're a rock star. So be a rock star. Be in a band. Show that cooperation can exist. Rock bands are a form of cooperative culture. So we're going to teach that too in our core curriculum. Wow, rock's got everything. It's like the hemp of culture. It does this, that, and the other. And yet it has been denied, negated, scapegoated, suppressed, and colonized by materialism. But we'll get into that later. In spite of all those problems and setbacks, rock is the best you could give to your youth.